As Aidan entered his boss's cabin, he was shocked to see a picture of his mother on his desk. As Aidan laid eyes on the picture, his breath caught in his throat. The woman in the picture bore an uncanny resemblance to his mother Jessica, the same brown hair, the same soft eyes, the same warm smile. But how could that be? His mother had never mentioned knowing his boss, let alone being so close to him that his picture was on her desk. The woman in the picture was young, probably in her early 20s, but there was no mistaking her smile. It was the same smile that had helped him overcome countless childhood fears and celebrated every little victory. Aidan's mind was flooded with questions. Who was this woman to John Stanley? Why had his mother never mentioned knowing the billionaire CEO? And why did she have such an intimate picture of him? As he stood there, lost in thoughts, his boss John Stanley arrived. Seeing Aidan's sad face, the boss asked, "Is everything all right, Aidan? What happened to you?" Hearing this, Aidan said sorry to the boss and quickly left the office. His mind was spinning. As he went back to his room, Ethan could not erase that image from his mind. That picture had opened the door to a past he never knew existed, and he was determined to find out the truth, no matter where it took him. After all, Aidan did something that brought such a twist in the story that his boss, John Stanley himself, was stunned. After this, such a truth came to light that Aidan himself had not even imagined. That person in the picture was none other than Aidan's mother. Who had an affair with John Stanley, later John Stanley betrayed her. When Aidan came to know about this story, his boss took such a step that Aidan's life changed. Before moving forward in the story, please subscribe to the channel. Aidan had only been working at Stanley Enterprises for a few weeks, and already he was beginning to understand the power and presence of its CEO, John Stanley. The man was a legend in the corporate world, known for his ambition, his razor-sharp focus, and his imposing authority. Yet, as Aidan wandered into John's spacious, meticulously organised office one afternoon to drop off a file, his attention fell on something entirely different. A photograph, resting quietly in a simple wooden frame on the edge of John's otherwise pristine desk. At first, the photo seemed unremarkable. The colours had faded over time, and its edges were worn, as if it had been handled more than most things in the room. It depicted a young woman with warm, gentle eyes and an open, radiant smile. But as Aidan looked closer, a sense of shock rippled through him. That smile, those eyes, they felt startlingly familiar. The woman in the picture looked exactly like his mother, Jessica, only younger. Aidan's heart began to race. How could this be? He had no reason to think his mother had ever crossed paths with a man as influential as John Stanley. Jessica had always been a constant in Aidan's life, warm, kind, and fiercely devoted to him. She was his anchor, and he had grown up knowing her as a single mother, her life seeming an open book in so many ways. She'd shared stories from her youth, funny anecdotes from her early career, and the ups and downs of single motherhood. But never once had she mentioned knowing a man like John Stanley, let alone anything so significant as to leave a photograph behind on his desk. Aidan found himself unable to look away from the image, his mind swirling with questions. Why did John Stanley have a picture of a woman who looked like his mother? And why had she kept that part of her life hidden from him? Lost in thought, Aidan reached out and touched the edge of the frame. The young woman's face, so familiar yet so out of place in this high-powered corporate office, seemed almost to watch him back. Aidan's thoughts began to race. He tried to imagine his mother at that age, perhaps around her 20s, with that same hopeful smile. And then the unsettling questions crept in. Who had she been back then? What had she left unsaid? As he stood there, leaning over the photograph in a trance, he didn't notice John Stanley enter the office behind him. Suddenly, a deep voice broke his concentration, sending a chill down his spine. "Is everything okay, Aidan?" John asked. Aidan snapped up, nearly stumbling in his surprise, a blush of embarrassment creeping onto his face. He quickly stammered an apology, trying to explain his curiosity without sounding accusatory. John's eyes followed his gaze to the photograph, and for a brief moment, something shifted in his expression. A fleeting look of pain or perhaps regret. For a man who was known for his cool demeanor and powerful presence, that glimmer of vulnerability was unexpected. John seemed to look right through the photo, as though he was seeing something distant and painful. "Ah, yes," he murmured softly, almost as though speaking to himself, a dear friend from long ago. Aidan felt a strange prickle at those words, the phrase dear friend carrying a weight he couldn't quite understand. There was something hidden in that brief, quiet admission, something that hinted at a history he'd never been told. But before he could press further, John composed himself, his face returning to its usual guarded expression. Realizing he might have overstepped, Aidan apologized once more and hurried out of the office, leaving with more questions than answers. Aidan could still feel his pulse racing as he left John Stanley's office. The faded photograph, the hauntingly familiar smile, his mind couldn't let go of what he'd just seen. As he returned to his desk, the image of the young woman lingered in his thoughts, her warm eyes and kind face reminding him so much of his mother. Who was she to John? And why did he speak of her with such sadness? Aidan tried to bury the questions, telling himself it was none of his business, but curiosity gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery held a significance beyond the ordinary. The next morning, after a sleepless night spent turning over countless possibilities in his head, Aidan found himself near John's office again, lingering at the door with the same restless energy that had kept him up. He wasn't sure what he hoped to learn, but something urged him forward, a need for answers he barely understood. Summoning his courage, Aidan knocked gently and stepped inside. John Stanley was there, immersed in a pile of documents, but his piercing gaze lifted the moment Aidan walked in. "Aidan," John greeted him, his tone even and controlled as always. But Aidan thought he caught a flicker of something in his boss's eyes, an awareness perhaps that Aidan hadn't been able to let go of yesterday's discovery. After a few moments of small talk, Aidan couldn't hold back any longer. The words spilled out of him before he could reconsider. "Mr. Stanley, the photograph on your desk. I couldn't help but notice the woman in it. She looked a lot like someone I know." His voice trembled slightly, half from nerves and half from the weight of what he was implying. "My mother, actually." A silence fell between them, thick and loaded, and for a moment Aidan worried he'd overstepped a boundary he could never take back. But John didn't seem angry. Instead, he looked at Aidan with a strange expression, something between surprise and sorrow. "Your mother," he repeated, his voice softer than Aidan had ever heard it. John's gaze drifted down and a shadow crossed his face, the mask of authority slipping just enough for Aidan to glimpse a more vulnerable side of the powerful CEO. "Yes," John finally said, his tone so quiet it felt as if he were speaking to himself. "She was a dear friend. A very dear friend." The phrase hung in the air, and Aidan could sense the heavy meaning beneath it. The way John spoke, his choice of words and the pain woven into them, stirred something deep within Aidan. That wasn't just the sadness of a long-lost friendship, it was the kind of regret that hinted at a story left unfinished, a connection lost before its time. And suddenly, the photograph, so carefully preserved despite its worn edges, took on a different significance. This was no ordinary friend. But before Aidan could press further, John seemed to catch himself, straightening his posture, his expression hardening just slightly. "I haven't thought about her in years," he added, almost as if trying to convince himself. Yet the tremor in his voice betrayed him. In that moment, Aidan sensed a man who, despite his wealth and power, carried an ache that no success had ever erased. Aidan felt a surge of emotions he couldn't quite place. Confusion, anger, sympathy. How did his mother, the warm-hearted, resilient woman who had raised him alone, fit into the life of this powerful, complex man? And why had she never spoken of him? As he watched John's face, the guarded expression returning, Aidan had a feeling that their lives were more connected than he'd ever known, that his past was tangled with John Stanley's in a way he was only beginning to understand. Realizing he wouldn't get any more answers today, Aidan nodded and quietly left the office, his mind racing. He had sensed something raw and unhealed in John's tone, a pain he could tell the CEO had kept buried for years. Aidan knew this was only the beginning. The truth lay somewhere in the shadows of both their pasts, and he was determined to find it, no matter what it revealed. That evening, after wrestling with his thoughts all day, Aidan went to his mother's house. He had always thought of their relationship as open and honest. Jessica was someone he could talk to about anything. She had raised him single-handedly, always supporting him, always there. But tonight, as he sat across from her in the small, familiar living room, Aidan felt a tension that he couldn't shake. "Mom," he began, trying to sound casual though his heart was racing, "I saw a picture today of a woman who looked just like you. It was on my boss's desk, John Stanley's desk." He didn't expect the reaction he got. Jessica's warm expression froze and her face seemed to drain of colour. She stared at him, and in her eyes he saw something he had never seen before, a hint of fear, maybe, or perhaps shame. "Mom?" he pressed, his voice gentle but insistent. Do you know John Stanley?" Jessica looked away, wringing her hands as she tried to gather herself. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke, barely above a whisper. "Aidan, some things are better left in the past. I knew him. Yes, but that was a long time ago." Her words were halting, her usually calm voice trembling. Aidan felt a pang of guilt for pushing her, but he couldn't stop now. The need for answers had taken hold. "Mom, please," he urged. "It just doesn't make sense. You've always been so open with me. I don't understand why you never told me about this." Jessica looked up, and for a moment Aidan thought she might actually tell him everything. But then, just as quickly, her gaze hardened. She shook her head, resolute. "Aidan, there's nothing good that can come from digging into this," she said, her voice firmer now. "John Stanley, he's not the man you think he is. He may be charming, powerful, but there's a part of him you don't know, and I want you to stay away from him." Aidan was taken aback. He had never seen his mother this way before, so closed off, so insistent on leaving something unsaid. He tried to understand, tried to piece together the fragments she'd given him, but it only left him more confused and frustrated. "Why, Mom? Why are you so afraid of him?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. But Jessica just shook her head, as if she couldn't bear to explain. "Just trust me, Aidan," she pleaded, reaching for his hand. "There are things in life that we're better off leaving alone. John Stanley is part of a chapter I closed a long time ago, and I'd hoped you would never have to know about it." Aidan pulled his hand back, feeling a strange sense of betrayal. This was his mother, the one person he thought he knew inside and out. Yet here she was, holding on to a secret that she refused to share. The thought of John Stanley, powerful and enigmatic, being connected to his mother in some unknown way was something he couldn't simply ignore. Every instinct told him there was more to this story, something big that she was hiding to protect him. "Mom, I need to know," he said, his voice soft but firm. "This is about more than just you or me. If he was such a big part of your past, then it's my story too. Please, help me understand." But Jessica's face grew even more guarded. She shook her head, her eyes pleading with him to let it go. "I can't, Aidan. Just promise me you'll keep your distance from him, for your own sake." Aidan stood up, feeling a surge of anger and confusion. "I don't understand why you're hiding this from me," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "But I can't just forget about it. I need to know who he really is, and what he meant to you." Jessica's eyes filled with sadness as she watched him go. Aidan could see the pain on her face, and part of him wanted to drop the whole thing, to give her the peace she was so desperately clinging to. But he couldn't. Not now. He had to know the truth, even if it meant discovering parts of his family's past that he might never be ready for. As he walked out into the night, Aidan felt a mix of emotions swirling within him: anger, confusion, and a growing sense of resolve. His mother's words had only deepened the mystery, and he knew he wouldn't be able to rest until he understood what she was hiding. No matter how painful or complicated it turned out to be, he was determined to uncover the truth. Aidan couldn't let go of the mystery surrounding his mother and John Stanley. Her guarded words and the flicker of pain in John's eyes left too many questions unanswered. Determined, he began piecing together the puzzle, reaching into the fragments of her past through whatever means he could. Old letters, boxes of photographs, and family albums stored away in the attic. With each discovery, Aidan felt like he was drawing closer to an invisible thread connecting his life to the secrets his mother had hidden for so long. In a dusty box tucked away beneath layers of keepsakes, Aidan stumbled upon letters, brittle with age, penned in his mother's handwriting. They were written with a warmth and tenderness he recognized but had never seen directed toward anyone but himself. She wrote of moments filled with laughter, stolen afternoons, and dreams shared with a young man named John. As Aidan read, he began to understand that his mother hadn't merely known John Stanley, they had once been deeply in love. Each line painted a picture of their relationship, a romance filled with a genuine bond, with promises of a future together, a dream of a life intertwined. Jessica's letters described John as ambitious, a visionary even in his youth, always striving for more. She admired him, respected his determination, and found herself swept up in his charm and passion. But as their relationship unfolded through her words, Aidan noticed a change, a gradual tension creeping in as John became more consumed by his career. Jessica's letters, once filled with hope, started to show signs of doubt and heartbreak. She wrote of feeling overlooked, left behind, like she was becoming just another part of his past rather than his future. While she believed in him and his dreams, she realized that his vision for success was beginning to eclipse their relationship. The breaking point came in the final letters, written in a voice so raw and vulnerable that Aidan could almost feel her heartache through the faded ink. John, who once spoke of building a life together, had slowly shifted his focus. His ambition and drive had carried him to the doorsteps of powerful corporations, and with each step forward, Jessica seemed to fade further into the background. It was clear from her words that John was driven by a relentless desire to rise in the corporate world, even if it meant leaving everything and everyone else behind. Jessica's heartbreak was evident. She had loved him deeply, had envisioned a future with him, but he had chosen a different path. She described a final conversation where she had confronted him, asking where she stood in his life and if they still shared a future. But John, her John, had become someone else, a man focused solely on his ambition. He had hesitated, unable to promise her the life they had once dreamed of, unwilling to sacrifice his career for their love. His silence spoke volumes, and Jessica, realizing she could no longer wait for someone who wouldn't choose her, walked away, carrying the weight of a broken heart and dreams left unfulfilled. Aidan felt a wave of sadness and anger rise within him as he finished reading. His mother had been forced to make a painful choice, choosing to let go of the man she loved rather than watch him become someone she barely recognized. John's betrayal was not one of infidelity, but one of neglect, of valuing his ambitions more than the love they had shared. Aidan understood now why Jessica had hidden this part of her life from him. It was a story of dreams shattered, of a love that could have been, but never was. But with this newfound understanding came a torrent of mixed emotions. Aidan couldn't help but feel anger toward John Stanley, who had sacrificed his mother's love for the hollow promise of success. And yet, a part of him was also drawn to the man, perhaps even pitying him. John's choices had shaped both of their lives in ways neither had ever anticipated, leaving wounds that, even years later, had not fully healed. With a heavy heart, Aidan resolved to confront John once more, this time with the truth of what he had uncovered. His mother's past was no longer a hidden memory, but a part of his own story, a story he would no longer leave unanswered. The following week, Aidan's determination reached its peak. Armed with the knowledge of his mother's past and the emotional weight it carried, he knew it was time to confront John Stanley. He found himself standing outside the imposing glass doors of Stanley Enterprises, his heart pounding in his chest. The thrill of uncovering a family secret was now intertwined with the anxiety of facing the man who had unknowingly shaped much of his life. Aidan stepped into John's office, the same office where he had first stumbled upon the photograph. John looked up from his work, his expression shifting from surprise to concern as he noticed the intensity in Aidan's eyes. "Aidan," he said, setting aside a stack of papers, "what brings you here?" With a deep breath, Aidan plunged in. "I know about you and my mother," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "I know about your relationship, how you left her behind for your career, you broke her heart, and it's time you own up to that." The air grew heavy with silence. John's expression shifted from surprise to something akin to remorse. Aidan could see the man he'd idolized, the billionaire, the powerful CEO, begin to crumble under the weight of his past mistakes. John leaned back in his chair, his gaze falling to the desk, as if he was searching for the right words amid the chaos of memories. "I never intended to hurt her," John finally admitted, his voice hoarse. "When we were young, I loved Jessica more than I can express, but I was ambitious. I was so consumed by my drive to succeed that I failed to see how my choices affected her. I thought I was doing the right thing by pursuing my career, thinking I could provide for us both, but I ended up pushing her away." Aidan's heart softened slightly at the vulnerability in John's tone. There was no denying that the man in front of him carried the weight of his choices heavily. "You could have fought for her," Aidan replied, the anger in his voice tempered by understanding. "You could have chosen love over ambition. I know that now," John said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've lived with that regret every day, knowing that I lost the one woman I truly loved because I was too focused on success. It's a burden I've carried for years. I thought I could move on, but it never left me. I still think about her, what we could have had together." For a moment, Aidan saw a different side of John, a man who had been shaped by his choices and who now stood before him, stripped of the layers of power and wealth. Aidan felt a surge of empathy. Perhaps John was not just a villain in this story, but a flawed human being who had made a grave mistake, one that haunted him. "I don't want your sympathy," Aidan said, though his tone was gentler now. "I want you to understand the impact of your actions. My mother deserved better, and she's lived with that pain for so long." "I know," John said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry for everything. I would give anything to go back and change it, to tell her how much she meant to me." In that moment, Aidan realized that while he might never fully forgive John for the pain he had caused his mother, he could recognize the man's remorse. The confrontation had unveiled a shared hurt, a connection they both felt, rooted in love and loss. As Aidan stood in John's office, the weight of their conversation hung thick in the air. The confession of love, regret, and loss had created an unexpected bond between them, one Aidan hadn't anticipated. But just as he began to consider the possibility of understanding John, the conversation took a shocking turn. With a tremor in his voice, John continued, "There's something else you need to know, Aidan. When I left Jessica, she was pregnant." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, shattering the fragile atmosphere they had created. Aidan's heart raced, his mind reeling at the implications of what John had just revealed. "Pregnant?" he repeated, struggling to grasp the enormity of the confession. "You mean I might be?" John nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something else. Fear, perhaps. "I never knew. Jessica never told me. I left, thinking she'd be better off without me. And I never considered that there could have been a child." Aidan felt a wave of emotions crash over him, shock, confusion, and a profound sense of betrayal. His entire life had been shaped by his mother's decisions, and now it felt like the ground beneath him was shifting. Could he really be John Stanley's son? The pieces of his identity, which had always felt solid and defined, were suddenly crumbling, leaving him grappling with a reality he never saw coming. He recalled moments from his childhood, his mother's wistful glances when she spoke about her past, the way she'd grown quiet when certain names came up. Aidan felt the knot in his stomach tighten as he connected the dots. His life, his very being, was tied to a man he had viewed with a mixture of awe and resentment. "Why didn't she ever tell me?" Aidan asked, his voice trembling as he tried to process the truth. "I don't know," John replied, his voice heavy with regret. "Maybe she thought it was for the best. She wanted to protect you from the chaos of my life and the mistakes I made. But I've lived with this pain, the knowledge that I abandoned her, and possibly our child." Aidan's thoughts raced, spinning around the reality of this new information. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie, but he was standing at the center of it all. He had spent his life wondering who he was, trying to find his place in a world that often felt indifferent. Now the notion that he could be the son of a man like John Stanley, someone powerful and influential, altered everything he thought he knew. His heart ached for his mother, realizing the burden she had carried alone. She had endured not just the heartache of a lost love, but the secret of a child, a life that could have existed in a different reality. As he looked at John, something shifted in their dynamic. This was no longer just about anger or betrayal. It was about family, about a legacy that was now intertwined in ways neither of them could have imagined. "Aidan," John said softly, breaking through his thoughts, "I never wanted to hurt either of you. I wish things had been different. I wish I had known." With those words, Aidan felt the ground beneath him shift once more. The implications of this revelation felt monumental, the enormity of it settling heavily on his shoulders. He had to confront his mother, but he also needed to process what it meant to possibly be John Stanley's son. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Aidan knew one thing for sure: the truth would not remain hidden any longer. The revelation that he might be John Stanley's son hung in the air like a storm cloud, charged with emotions that left Aidan feeling both vulnerable and empowered. John's gaze was intense, filled with a mixture of guilt and hope as he spoke again. "Aidan, I know I can't erase the past, but I want to make amends. I want to support you, not just financially, but as a father should. I want you to have a place in my life, in my business." Aidan's heart raced at the proposition. It was overwhelming, the idea of stepping into a new life, one where he could be associated with the powerful man he had both resented and admired. On one hand, the offer seemed tempting. It opened doors to opportunities he had never dreamed of. But on the other, it felt like a betrayal of everything he had learned from his mother. The pain and struggle she endured to raise him alone without John's support were woven into the fabric of his identity. "I don't know if I can just accept that," Aidan replied, his voice steady but trembling with uncertainty. "You walked away from my mother and the life you could have had with her. How can I trust that you're not just looking to make yourself feel better now?" John's expression softened, the remorse in his eyes deepening. "I understand your anger, Aidan. I can't change what I did, and I know I don't deserve your trust. But I've spent years regretting my choices, knowing I lost something irreplaceable. I want to be part of your life, not just for me, but for you too. You deserve to know who I am and to have a chance at a different future." The sincerity in John's voice resonated with Aidan, stirring conflicting emotions within him. Aidan couldn't ignore the magnetic pull of the opportunity: financial security, mentorship, the chance to learn from someone with immense experience in business. Yet, the thought of forging a relationship with John felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing the weight of his past with the potential of the future. "Do you even know how much you've hurt my mother?" Aidan challenged, his voice rising slightly. "She sacrificed everything, kept your secrets, and raised me alone while carrying the weight of your choices. How can I believe you now?" "I know I can't make up for the pain I caused her," John admitted, his voice low and filled with regret. "But I want to try. I want to help you, Aidan, to be there for you. I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness or to expect anything from you. But I want to be a part of your life, even if it's just as a mentor at first." Aidan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision before him. The reality of accepting John's offer was daunting. He needed time to process everything: his identity, his mother's pain, and the complexity of starting anew with the man who had caused so much hurt. It wasn't just a matter of trust. It was about redefining his own sense of self and navigating the murky waters of family and loyalty. "I need to think about it," Aidan finally said, his voice quiet but resolute. He could see the understanding in John's eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the turmoil within him. As Aidan turned to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a complicated journey, one that would force him to confront not only his relationship with John, but also the truth about his mother, himself, and what it meant to truly forgive. As Aidan stepped away from John's office, a whirlwind of emotions coursed through him. The weight of the revelation about his parentage hung heavily, yet within that burden lay the seeds of something new, a chance to reshape his life. After days of contemplation, he realized that he didn't have to approach this new reality from a place of resentment or anger. He could take ownership of his own narrative. Accepting John's offer wasn't about forgiving him outright. It was about reclaiming his own story and forging a path that was uniquely his. Returning home, Aidan shared the news with his mother, Jessica. The tension in the room was palpable as he explained his decision to join Stanley Enterprises. Jessica's face was a canvas of mixed emotions: shock, concern, and perhaps a flicker of hope. "You know who he is, what he did, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do, Mom. But this is my chance to understand more about myself, to see the world through a different lens," he replied, trying to articulate the resolve that had formed within him. "I want to learn about the man I might have been raised to know. I want to see what I can do on my own terms, not just as your son, but as Aidan, someone with potential and dreams of his own." While Jessica was hesitant, she could see the determination in her son's eyes. Aidan wasn't seeking revenge, he was searching for clarity. By stepping into this new role, he intended to uncover the truths that had long been buried. He wanted to understand the complexities of his family history, the pain that had shaped his mother, and how his life had been intertwined with John's all along. As he started his journey at Stanley Enterprises, Aidan found himself immersed in a world that was both exhilarating and intimidating. The high-stakes environment was a far cry from the humble upbringing he had known. Yet, rather than feeling out of place, Aidan felt empowered. Each day presented a new opportunity to carve out his identity. He attended meetings, contributed ideas, and began to build relationships with his colleagues, all while carefully navigating the complicated dynamics of being John's son. The role brought its own challenges. Aidan was constantly reminded of the legacy that came with John's name, but he was determined not to let it overshadow his ambitions. He worked hard to prove himself, focusing on establishing his own reputation. He sought mentors beyond John, learning from others who had no preconceived notions of who he was or where he came from. In this journey of self-discovery, Aidan also found a renewed sense of purpose. He started advocating for social responsibility within the company, championing initiatives that aligned with his values. He wanted to create a positive impact, to show that being part of the Stanley legacy didn't have to mean repeating the mistakes of the past. As he navigated the complexities of his new reality, Aidan came to understand that this chapter wasn't solely about reconciling with John or uncovering family secrets. It was about empowerment and redefining what family meant to him. With each step, Aidan felt a sense of liberation, a chance to write his own future, to embrace the possibilities that lay ahead, and to reclaim his family's story on his own terms. In the end, he was not just the son of John Stanley. He was Aidan, a young man ready to forge his path and leave his mark on the world.